Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Have you ever had the feeling or certain emotions that come up over something you thought you worked through or resolved long ago? Maybe you had a situation with a friend or a relative and you did some therapy around it, maybe even some emotional or mindset work on it. And those feelings went away and your relationship was better, but all of a sudden you're being triggered again and you don't really know why. This can sometimes result in a, what the heck moment. Like, what is going on here? Why am I being triggered when I haven't been triggered? And sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 5 or 10 years. We never know when these moments are going to arise. And it usually takes us by surprise. At least it did for me, because this has been happening to me recently. And at first I didn't completely know what was going on. A couple months ago, I shared my own experience with that occurring with my mom. But again, it happened in the last week. And so it made me think, why is this happening? What's going on? Like, I was really actually confused by it. I felt like I had regressed. I felt like I had regressed in this relationship. And then I realized that there was something else going on. And that is what we're going to cover today. We are going to be covering, when a trigger is asking you to dig a little bit deeper in your relationships, in your, self-growth, in your journey. And so we are going to discuss specifically what happens when the triggers resurface, why these triggers are resurfacing and what's happening, and how to address these triggers. If you're curious as to if you have any stored emotions or trauma that might be causing your illness, preventing you from achieving your goals, or even just showing up as your most authentic self, I invite you to take my free stored emotions and trauma quiz, and you will find that link in the show notes. So for me, this specific situation goes back to a relationship that I have with some extended family members, and the specific trauma. I don't want to say it was trauma. Yeah, no, I'm lying. It actually is trauma, because sometimes we try to downplay things, especially when there are close people involved, especially family members. So no, truly, this was traumatizing for me, because I was still relatively young when this was happening, but I was a young adult. So yeah, I was a young adult when this was happening. And it's interesting because I remember these experiences like they were yesterday. The crux of what was happening was, whenever we got together, I just felt largely disrespected, unseen, and unheard. And like, in my brain, what I constantly was thinking is, I'm invisible to these people. And it was fascinating because whenever we would be, it was usually like a small group, not too huge. There'd be a small group of us, and they would typically talk over me. Like, I would be talking and they would have and this, mind you, was taking place, I should give some more context, between myself and 2 extended family members. And there were a few other people in the group, but this specifically goes back to my relationship with these 2 extended family members. And we would all be talking, sitting in a group, usually either at a table or, in the family room, or, at, in the kitchen, around an island or something like that. And literally I would be talking and they would just start talking over me like I wasn't there. It would be really, really interesting. And then if we were talking amongst ourselves, they would often completely ignore what I had to say. And they would shift the conversation to something else totally different, or just completely sidestep what I had to say and my point of view. I literally, like I said, I so often felt invisible. And The other piece of it is if they actually were listening, which I felt was a rare situation, they would always find things wrong with my point of view or take offense to it, especially because if it wasn't aligned with their point of view and their opinions and worldviews, they always had to comment. Like, I also remember in the back of my mind feeling like I feel like I'm dealing with toddlers or children because they couldn't not respond and not keep their mouths shut. Like, if they didn't agree, or if it was something, they'd be like, and they act like it's a big deal. And it was interesting because it so brought me back to childhood, because those are often the things that were ingrained in us, right? You can, be seen and not heard. You shouldn't speak your mind. If you speak your mind, that might be danger, right? There were so many of these things, and it definitely brought me back to that feeling of being a child and just keeping my mouth shut for fear of what might happen if I actually spoke my truth. And it was interesting because when in this situation, if I did speak my mind, I was met with some kind of gaslighting response, like basically invalidating my point of view or my feelings or some kind of snarky comment. And it was interesting because in my healing journey, I did some work around these people. This was not, as you know, if you've been, following me for the last, I want to say we're like probably close to 100 episodes now. If you've been following that journey and what I've spoken about and what I've experienced, a lot of my inner work had to do with my, like, the nuclear family, like mom and dad and, siblings and things like that. But this was, like I said, this is more extended family. And it was interesting because I didn't have to do a lot of direct work surrounding them, because of when I was doing the other healing work, healing those other, very deep-seated traumas that came, through childhood, but also through my teens and my early adulthood. Healing that really healed almost all of this. I think can recall like one specific, or maybe one or two specific sessions when I actually went in with the intention of healing, pieces of the puzzle to do with these people. So it was really kind of fascinating how, like, healing most of, what happened to me really did provide quite a bit of healing surrounding this circumstance. And I only had to do a little bit of work, with this situation. But it was fascinating because truly I can say I have not been triggered like I would have been around them in a very, very long time. I'm talking years, like many years. And yeah, at least, I mean, probably somewhere in the space of 8 to 10 years, 7 to 10 years, something like that. I always think about things in the timeline of, like, since I gave birth to my first child, there's life before kids and life after kids. So yeah, it's really interesting because I really had it, like everyone can annoy you every once in a while, but it's like something that you kind of brush off and ignore, right? And I would say over time that, again, another situation where I did the inner work, it kind of changed the dynamic of our relationship. And I honestly attribute this to, doing the work myself, watching my inner self upgrade and change, and then also having really strong and firm boundaries when it came to, a lot of these interactions. And I basically got to the point also where if that was happening in those moments and it stopped, it eventually stopped. Like, I just wouldn't have any of it, anything, I wouldn't have it. I would just walk away. I would not, and it was interesting because to me, I don't think these people are the most aware. And I don't even know if it crossed their mind that that's why I walked away, or I would sometimes say something. And occasionally, especially I'd say in more recent years, it might be met with a little more dialogue, but it's dialogue that would be more in the realm of curiosity, which is good, right? It's in the realm of curiosity and other, just not in an offensive way like it used to be. But recently, there had been some things that are coming up. And like I said before, like occasionally there would be little things that happened, and like I would like I don't want to say ignore it because I wasn't ignoring it, but it wasn't something that triggered me. Like I didn't get that feeling. When you are triggered, you will know because you feel something. You feel something internally, or it brings up an emotion, or if you start ruminating on it, which is this is kind of what happened to me. I was like, what is going on? How is this happening? Like, I haven't had these feelings in so long. And again, it was kind of like what I shared with you guys some episodes ago when I was talking about like my mom and my healing journey with my mom and how some things were coming up. I had that one massive trigger that I was like, what is going on? But it made me realize that there was still a piece of the puzzle that I needed to deal with regard to our relationship. And that really was a pivotal and massive transformation moment for for our relationship across the board, like me meeting her where she's at and her coming closer to meeting me where I'm at, and it really did bring us closer together. And that was a really, really awesome experience. And so since that happened a couple months ago, again, like I got to the point at first, it's always kind of like startling when this happens. And I'm like, again, we're going to get into the why is this happening? And I started asking myself questions because I want to say, this is very fresh. It probably came into like my consciousness about a week and a half ago. Yeah, it was probably early on last week. And I don't like at first when there was a conversation that was had and I was kind of annoyed by it. And I was like, why is this happening? And I was sick and I thought it was just because I was sick. My daughter gave me a stomach virus and I was sick for a couple days. And sometimes when I'm not feeling well, like my whole vibrational energy, like collapses and can get very low, which is totally normal for when you're sick. Most of us aren't vibrating at a high level or feeling really good and positive and amazing when we're sick, especially when you're vomiting. And so I kind of like chalked it up to that for, the greater part of that week. So around, I want to say Thursday or Friday of last week. So that would have been a week ago from when I'm recording this now. I was like, it's still coming up for me. So why? Why is this happening? And then I also found that in the last couple of days, like I started thinking about it more, and I used to be a ruminator and now I'm not. Like, and I know if I'm ruminating about something that there's something in it for me. And that's exactly why these things happen, because there is a missing piece of the puzzle. I like to say it's a missing piece of the healing puzzle because these layers reveal themselves and they tend to reveal themselves at just the right time. As I've talked about many times before, the healing journey is not linear. Like it's one of those things, it loves to spiral, it ebbs and flows. There are times when you resolve things, I always say air quotes, resolve things, because oftentimes things are not completely 100% resolved when we think they are. Sometimes they are. If it's something smaller or more superficial, yes, but sometimes there are some deep seated pieces of the puzzle that need to be kind of dissolved and dealt with and integrated in layers. And these layers reveal themselves over time. And sometimes it could be a couple of months and sometimes it can be years before these pieces come up. And for me, I was sitting there thinking, why is this coming up now? Like, what is going on? And then I knew it had everything to do with the fact that in the past 3 months, I have been doing a lot of shadow work integration. Because again, those of you who've been following, I really had some things that I guess I had been suppressing for a long time or hadn't been acknowledging within myself. And as you acknowledge these things, it reveals other pieces of the puzzle, especially as you integrate them. And it was fascinating because you all know who've been with me for a long time that at a retreat a couple years ago, the idea of not being enough or not being good enough was kind of like the first time I had awareness surrounding that, because never in my life had I consciously thought that before. But I like that kind of, there are pieces, I think that, like, I shouldn't say I think, I know that for me, most of that is fully dealt with and integrated, but you'll find that even when you have, we'll call it, the container of not being enough, there are different pieces of it and there are different nuances. And, you know, to be quite honest, like I knew that this was happening by design and happening for a reason, right? It's happening for me and not to me, right? And so I knew that there was so much more that I had to dig into on like, why was this coming up? And like in the past several episodes, I think like episodes like 31 to 34 specifically, and I might be off, but I think that's actually what they were. I've discussed the shadow work and the integration, and that's all really, really important. And for me specifically in this situation, I was like, I feel like I have done so much work surrounding the, not being enough, not being good enough. But what is the lesson in this? And for me, I realized after doing what I'm going to suggest next for you to get into, I realized that it was me not always speaking my truth and my voice, sometimes allowing things to happen in relationships and dynamics that are close to me for the sake of keeping the peace. And I truthfully did not think I had been doing that at all. I was like, I have good boundaries, and I really do have good boundaries. But there are sometimes it's one of those situations where it's like, I always tell people, it's like you pick and choose the right times to bring things up. Or, like sometimes, like, let's just say you have like a spouse or a child who is very emotionally charged. Are you going to tell them, something that's not necessarily positive in that moment to, basically fuel their fire and make the situation worse? Or are you going to maybe save it for later and, table it to and wait for a time that is more conducive to you having an adult, or I'd say rational, respectful conversation where you can show up with loving curiosity and not show up in a reactive nature? And I realized that sometimes I will choose not to engage people when these things are happening because there already might be an emotionally charged situation. So I know that I'm very good at reading the energy of a room and like the dynamic of a group. And I know, even when my mom and dad were here, I pushed back a little bit, and challenged them on some of their thoughts. And it was interesting because that felt really, really good. And I think I shouldn't say I think, I know that I was not applying that to all of my close relationships. And when I do that, it does not feel good internally. And it's interesting because sometimes I think I tell myself, okay, we're going to talk about this later, or I will bring it up later, but then I end up not doing it. And so that is not honoring my voice and not honoring my truth and my authenticity. And so that is what I had been doing. And how I got to that place where I figured it out was basically how you address these things. What happens? What lesson is the trigger asking you to dig deeper for? And this is how you address it. You need to ask yourself, what lesson do I need to learn, or in some cases, relearn or revisit? That's one good question to ask yourself. Another one is, what am I ignoring? What am I ignoring? What am I burying? What are you hiding from yourself because you don't necessarily want to face it? Because let's be honest, it's hard to acknowledge these things that we have, in our minds, we may have deemed negative when they really aren't negative. They just are. But we have placed a negative connotation on them, or fear, or something that makes us not want to address it. So there's that. Again, for me, this was the big aha moment. It's like, where am I out of alignment and not feeling authentic? That was a big one for me. So ask yourself that question. When you are moving through the day, notice when these thoughts tend to come up. that might give you a hint as to why this is happening. You might have an interaction with a person or read an email or do something, even just sitting with yourself. And then that might trigger these ruminations or these thoughts or feelings you're having about this situation, right? This resurfaced trigger. So I encourage you to do that. And then again, we bring up the shadows, right? The shadow work. Like, what shadow might I need to integrate? Or what part of myself am I not accepting that I need to integrate? And so again, that was another kind of piece of the puzzle for me, because I knew that like within this I'm not enough, there were pieces of the shadow work in there too. And so that was something that I worked on releasing, integrating, having awareness over, all of that. And so my first advice to you would be to journal it out. Just get out a journal or a piece of paper. I am much more a fan of doing that than to doing it on your phone, like voicing it or doing a note. If that's your jam, that's fine. But there is something like biochemical, there are biochemically positive changes that happen in your nervous system when you actually write things out. And don't think about it too much. Sit with these questions that I just asked you, or even there might be other ones that come up for you as you're going through this process, but just let it flow. Let it flow. Don't edit yourself. Don't judge yourself. Just let it flow. And what will happen is you will, sometimes you might end up with like one page. Sometimes you might end up with 5. I know that when I do this, most of the time I end up with at least 2, if not, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages, because I'm just letting it all out. I'm letting like that free, like kind of like stream of consciousness out onto the paper so I can see what is going on and what things are, highlighted for me, or what's sticking out on the why is this happening, and what lessons can I learn from it. And so if that, most of the time that works. And what that's doing, it's bringing awareness to you. And then sometimes, as I think I spoke about this in maybe episode, I want to say it was like 33 or 34. But when you bring awareness to something, that allows you to accept it and integrate it. And like I said in that episode, you don't have, like, not everything has to be a big thing. And if it is a big thing for you, then I encourage you to get some help so you can move on and this trigger doesn't hold power over you anymore. But for some of us, and in some circumstances, like doing the shadow work that I've done in the past couple of months, a lot of it just has been bringing awareness to it, integrating it, finding where I'm out of alignment because of it, and shifting my behaviors and shifting my mindset. And don't get me wrong, I still sometimes have days where I'm not in that space and I have to remind myself, hey, you're falling back into another pattern. And I will, like an old pattern, I should say, and then I will like rewire that and like reinforce it and make a really concerted effort not to do that. So that can very much happen. Sometimes writing it out just feels good. You can have whatever that stream of consciousness was, and then you can review it and see, like I said, where do you need to dig deeper? What's resonating with you? And then maybe have some additional like journaling sessions on that. And that can also be very helpful. But if you are feeling stuck, so when I say feeling stuck, that's going to look like you've written this all out, you know what it is, but you can't move past it. Like you are just sitting there and you're holding on to these emotions and you can't move past it. That is classic feeling stuck. If you still are getting triggered by hearing these people's names or a certain situation, like, or a certain experience, thinking about it, hearing about it from other people or something similar, and it brings this stuff up for you, I would say, again, that's pretty telltale sign of still being stuck in it. Like I said, the rumination, if you find yourself still thinking about it in any capacity, it doesn't necessarily have to be like constant rumination. But if you're finding yourself, even your mind drifting off to it, it is holding power over you in some way. It's like taking your energy, your precious energy, and taking it to a place that is not serving you. And so I invite you to work with somebody else in some capacity that resonates with you to help yourself move through this. And like I said, sometimes this is something pretty easy to work through. And, other times it might actually be revealing something that's a little bit deeper. And this is just a piece of that deeper issue. So we really can learn so much by, digging into our triggers and like asking yourself to go deeper. Like, what is this trigger meaning to me? And if this resonates with you, I really encourage you to walk through this process. And as always, if you have experienced, this type of situation, I'd love to hear from you what that story was. Or, if you resolved it, how you resolved it. I always love hearing from you. And like I always say, you can, comment on the YouTube page. You can, send me an email, send me a DM. I respond to all of those. But I really would love to hear your story and how you might have been impacted by this. Or even if you have a question about this, I'd love to hear that too. And as always, sending you lots and lots of love until next time. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.